All right, everyone, welcome to the 49th NSTHA Ask the Chief Forum. This forum, we're going to be tackling contradictions. And I think we'll just go ahead and get right into it. Okay, I'm going to spin that wheel for the first question. Spin the wheel.
Nara.
Okay. All right, Nara.
Okay. So my question is to do about sex. How the media advertising using sex constantly because it's grab attention, but at the same time, cultural, religious, and social norm policing it with shame.
Mhm. Okay.
Yep.
So, in other words, we have what we call the moralist, like religion, and even just, I guess, a lot of people who actually have their opinions about sexuality. A lot of them do tend to be involved in religions, but they can be kind of contradictory themselves, having to do with sex. And again, when I was years ago, they would talk about teen pregnancy and the pregnancy rate of young girls getting pregnant and so on, and I guess some kind of stress on social services if they don't have families to help them take care of the kids. But with that said, they're literally how things work here. They literally will lambast. It's very contradictory. Of course, that's what this is about. It's contradictory. In one sense, they talk about being responsible sexually, but then in another sense, there's always these innuendos that go on having to do and talk about sexuality or people, being promiscuous, or movies having to do with people being promiscuous. And years ago, with movies, they had got what they called this particular group that would basically police movies is what they were doing. I don't have the name, it's not coming to me right off the bat, where they were targeting movies for morals and things of that sort. And even some of the morals were just like outlandish things having to do with, mixed race relationships or romance and things like that was really, big on their list, as well as movies having too much sexual innuendo. So one would think that more modern movies had sexual innuendos, but in the early 1900s, there was a lot of sexual innuendos, not much on nudity. If they can get away with it, they would have like, flesh-colored bodysuits or something like that. But again, this, sexuality has been something that's been sold and to the populace for ages. And again, when you come into religious beliefs around sexuality, we know that there's a lot of hypocritical behavior when it comes to, I would say across the board of your major religious groups, where you would have someone who's supposed to be the pillar of the community, pillar of their religion, pastors, and monks and so on, and these other ones, where if you go into some detail and some depth and some research, you'll find that there are things written about what they would call sexual improprieties amongst these particular groups. And I would say the ones that they outed the most tend to be the Catholics, Catholic priests and so on, having to do with their interactions with young boys and at times young girls and inappropriate behavior. And so the reality is like it seems as though the matrix, the system is contradictory in itself. It's almost like something that tells you not to do something, but then they promote it. You I think I told a story had to do with my father. I think they were Baptists when he was growing up. Excuse me, they were Baptists when he was growing up, and he was. I think he was. He said he was like 16 at the time, and he had a girlfriend around the same age, 16, and he found out that the preacher of the church was sleeping with his girlfriend. And how the preacher dealt with that was that one, he literally, confronted the preacher and wanted to fight him, and the preacher beat the shit out of him, basically. So it kind of left not the best taste in his mouth when it comes to religion. And even as I've said in the past, my grandmother unit was involved in religion. I would say all her whole life, pretty much. And she was married to a deacon, married to a pastor, and she would say things like when there was a period where the numbnuts were burning black churches or whatever, that she said, they really shouldn't be burning the churches; they should be burning the pastors. So again, there's this desire to embrace or believe in something, almost like they don't have much choice as far as like what to believe in, what religions to believe in, and so on. So they'll just continue to embrace a belief system that has all these flaws in it. So with that, I don't know how much more to go into it. But again, a lot of times when it comes to morals around sexuality, a lot of times it's usually those who are basically consider themselves to be religious or pious who always have the most to say about it. And then again, I've said this before, how moralistic are they? There's a lot of issues that go on with people in general in this world. And just because someone belongs to a so-called faith does not make them immune to all the other desires, like a sexual desire, when they talk about a God or something creating people and he creates them with these flaws to test them. So really, that's kind of screwed up. Because after hundreds of years, it still seems that the stuff is still pretty screwed up. So if I say were some almighty, being, whatever, and I created this situation for these people, I said, wow, they seem to be failing it constantly, left and right, left and right. Maybe I ought to change the rules, or maybe I ought to do some adjustments. So in that sense, it's hypocritical as well. You are made in the image of this being and so on, but this being, is not sexual, even though if you go into some of the Greek gods and all these, things were sexual. They're involved with so and so is involved with this individual or that individual. Someone is, enchants men and all of that. It's just a mess. It doesn't really make any sense. So if you wonder why you feel like you're going crazy at times, try to make sense of this. Okay.
Mhm.
So with that, I mean, there's more I could say on it, but for the sake of just moving on to the next question, I'm just going to go ahead and move on to the next question, and we can spin the wheel.
Eric.
Okay, Eric.
Okay. Mine had to do with food and how it seems like the system makes all the unhealthy food, candy, sweets, etc., cheap and affordable while simultaneously making all the healthy food higher price or less accessible for people who don't have the resources. But then they also say it's a problem to be obese or unhealthy. Also, just to add on a little further, you'll see the most memorable, extravagant, colorful commercial for the thing that's the worst for you. So yeah, that's what my question was about. Thank you.
Okay, good question too. Um, yeah, food is definitely one of the issues. When it comes to density, that's one of their favorite ways to tox people's energy out. Also, when you get into some of the paranormal stuff or individuals talking about witchcraft and things of that sort, there's a lot involved with eating food. Someone offering you a drink or offering you food. Even in some of the fairy tales, in like the Disney with the the Wicked Witch and the apple, offering food. So the reality of the matter is that the system wants suffering, but they claim that they don't. So again, I actually, there was a story, I digress a little bit, having to do with some people on some Polynesian island. That's when the U.S. was just bullying people off the island so they can do their nuclear tests and things like that. But there were this one group on this one island, I almost had the name of it, where there was some issues with their health. And before the West came in, they were eating the things that were natural to their environment. But they remember watching the documentary, and they had these little, melanated children, but their hair was kind of like a reddish or blondish color, which wasn't natural to their genetics. And when they looked into it, it found that they were suffering from some kind of malnutrition. And the parents who were feeding them were saying, well, they were feeding them stuff like, cheese puffs and and chips and things, and all these types of like packaged snack foods from the West. And they said, well, we were feeding these kids this stuff, which actually costs more than their natural stuff, because they felt that because it costs a bit more, that meant it had to be better for them.
Right.
But in reality, it was a different switch for them. They thought, well, if I'm paying a little bit more, I'm showing that I care for my kids and I'm feeding this stuff, and I'm believing these individuals who showed up, which is usually the case with imperialists anyway. They show up, say, oh, we're going to help you. Yeah, right. Like, yeah, you're going to help them. Yeah, we're here. Trust us. Eat this garbage. Die. Let us take your land. So it goes, and in other ways as well. Some thinking that, oh, if I spend more money on this garbage, it must be healthy, because they believe in altruism. They believe that there is goodness in the world, and maybe they don't lie like the West likes to lie. There's some First Nations individuals who said that lying never really existed until the Europeans showed up. And then they came up with the term forked tongue.
Hey, Chief,
Yes,
can I ask you a question?
sure.
Now, you were talking about, certain things like, candies and all that. Now, First Nations people, they used to get a bad rap about that. A lot of them were drunkards and everything.
Mhm.
But where did the drinks come from, right?
Yeah, in other words, well, we'll go back to the food, but yeah, this is a good one as well, having to do with alcoholic beverages. That there's no accident that when the colonials came in, or the invaders might have said came in, that they introduced that into that culture. And what would happen is that creating so much suffering amongst the people that they wanted to escape. And if they also, what have been done in a lot of different places, where elders were basically wiped out, those who knew the traditions, they try to wipe them out. Therefore, the younger individuals had no guidance. And so the imperialists would end up being the really screwed up foster parents. No, we're going to teach you, if you actually pay any attention to any First Nations stories or whatever about their historical experiences, especially after the Europeans arrived, they had what they call the Indian schools. And these were places where they were put into these schools, actually taken, and this had happened in Africa as well. They'd taken from their families, put in these schools, and then have their culture beat out of them, have their language beat out of them. There's this book from a guy who he passed on a couple years ago, named Malcolm Somé, wrote this book. I think it's Fire and Water. I read the book like some couple decades back. And he talks about how the Jesuit brothers came to his village and took him when he was very young, when he was, still what you consider a preschooler, and put him in the Jesuit. I don't know if you would call it, but like the church would literally, what do you call it, reformatory or something like that, where they had gathered all of these young kids from all these different areas of West Africa and proceeded to beat the culture out of them. They even had a system where they had a rotting goat's head. And when he came, he's wondering what's the deal with the rotting goat's head. They would put it on one kid. This is also to create mistrust amongst each other as well. And if that kid, in order to get this rancid, stinky, rotting goat head that he had to wear 24/7, he had to sleep with it as well, off of him, he had to rat out another kid who was speaking their native language. So, depending on the fortitude of the kid, they would just rat another kid out, which means weakening the camaraderie between those individuals. It's literally just another imperialistic way of divide and conquer. But also in the process, you destroy their connection to their culture and to their ancestors and all of that. And then replace with the Europeans' concept of their culture and their ancestry, and you learn about King Arthur and all this other shit. That really means nothing to you. So they did the same thing in a lot of places they went to, but the ones I know the most about have to do with African, on the African continent, and also what I've gotten from First Nations culture and what I've read and what I've heard and what I've been told. That those schools existed and those buildings still stand a lot. They switched it over after a while, but it's like, oh, they switched it over. Of course they switched it over. After they destroy you, what's the point? They don't need, and some really horrific things went on in these places. Young children disappearing, getting killed, getting raped, all this kind of stuff by the teachers. All these individuals who are supposed to be, there for their benefit, and then it messes up the minds of those who survive it. And one of the things I knew some time ago that alcoholism was pretty rampant amongst a good number of the First Nations groups, even to the point where they have a name for some of the entities that are connected to it. They call them alcohol spirits. And they said the alcohol spirits, if they show up, they're there for no good. They're there to destroy you. But a lot of the stories will talk about, oh yeah, when we were young, we went drinking. We're here drinking. We're doing this and drinking. They came over to the house and drinking. Yeah, that was introduced. That wasn't their culture. That was introduced. And the purpose was to destroy them. So any groups that have any balance that have to do with nature and so on, and there's a lot of indigenous groups that have that kind of balance with a certain akinness to Dunya, Gaia, Earth. To not destroy her, but to live with her. And any group that has that mindset, they get attacked. And you think that the groups that are attacking are doing it on their own? It's the stuff from the other side that supports it. So they're just following the orders of the thing on the other side that wants to destroy everything. So those who think, yeah, we're on the top of the food, fuck you. You're not on the top of anything, man. It's just a house Negro for density. Running around, burning, destroying, cutting everything down, fucking with everybody, denigrating everyone, no respect for others, then teach it to them so they can behave the same way that you behave. But anyway, didn't mean to get it all the way into that, but that is a reality. That is truth. You know?
Let's see. You know what's funny too, Chief? Back to the candy thing.
Hmm.
I would think this is the contradiction. Like when you go to the dentist, they clean your teeth, you know, you're a child, and then when you leave, they give you some candy.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
That is true. Yeah, I remember that. Yeah, they would give, we weren't really able to afford dentists until we became, young adults, whatever. But yeah, they would give kids like a sucker or something like that. Yeah, But also with some of the contradiction of dentistry, which literally a lot of it has to do with resources, has to do with money. One of the things I ran into with dentistry, I when I got dental insurance was when I really had my experience with dentists. When I was working for Dow Jones, and I had dental, and boy, the dentist he found all kinds of things that needed to be fixed. And when I was in art college, I had a tooth that broke, and and he could have fixed it, but I didn't have the money, to get root canals or anything. He said, I could fix it. I said, well, I don't have the money, man. You're going to have to pull it out. So he pulled it, and that was going, excuse me, a number of years, with that space there. Then I end up with dental insurance. Then they say, well, you have to get that fixed because the tooth above that's going to start to drop. I said, well, I had that happen when I was like 19 and I'm 26 now. If it had to stop, but I didn't really think about it because I didn't really know any better at the time. It's, but he said, oh, you're going to, let's put a bridge in there. Sorry. He said, let's put a bridge in there. So we're going to put this in there to prevent that tooth from dropping down. And I didn't really understand that when they put a bridge in your mouth, they proceed to destroy the teeth that are next to the space in order to put the bridge in there. And it's like a metal, it has metal in it, which means it flexes. And I learned this over years, which means every so many years, you have to go and get it replaced. And each time I went to get it replaced, the tooth under had deteriorated more and more each time. So in the end, excuse me again, sorry. So in the end, to fix a tooth that really didn't, space that really didn't need to be fixed, the dentist destroyed 2 other teeth. And then I ended up getting a implant because the other dentist said, well, those teeth are gone. Well, let's do it to the next teeth. So I got a gap with 3 screwed up teeth. And they're telling me, oh, yeah, we can we'll just do the same thing to the other ones. Oh, you're getting old anyway. At some point, you won't need those teeth. That's really the attitude. It really is. Check it out when you get to a certain age. See the attitude with doctors, dentists. So, yeah, I ain't getting it. So I just said, no, I don't plan on going anywhere anytime soon. If I'm around a lot longer, I won't have to be bothered with this. So I ended up going for an implant. It took a little bit getting used to, but I haven't lost any more teeth since then, except the implant kind of destroyed an upper tooth because the way that they put it in there or something. But in the end, I learned, and I haven't, other than having recent dental surgery because a tooth somehow got destroyed from inside out, and it wasn't like a cavity; it just kind of fell apart. And I have suspicions as to whether that has something to do with the implant. Yeah.
Basically, you pay them to F you out.
Yeah, literally. Well, that's really how it works here. They convince you to give them money to do things for you that you don't really need to have done. And when I had them put a crowd in, into the dentistry, well, there's information. When the guy had me do 2 root canals on the right side of the jaw teeth, and I went to a guy who actually my kid went to preschool with his kid, and he actually, we became kind of like friends and stuff. And he was pretty, he's a dentist, and he was a really cool guy. I liked him. I liked his wife. They were really, like really nice people. And so he's looking. He says, "I don't really want to cause any like legal issues. He said, but you got really good teeth. There's no reason why you should have all this work done. And so one of the things they would do when they do the root canal, they put a crown on there, and the crown has metal in it. It flexes, which means at some point it's going to come loose. And stuff gets under it before it comes loose, which means that it starts to rot a little bit. And if they can, if they can keep it, before it gets really, rotted, then they'll just put another crown on. So I said, they're putting this metal's flexing. I had this issue with the bridge. And so I went to a dentist, and they had porcelain crowns. And they had the metal crowns or whatever, made of silver or whatever. And he said, I suggest the silver. I said, no, I suggest the porcelain. He said, well, I would think, and I said, if it's on your list, porcelain, give me porcelain. Because guess what? Porcelain doesn't flex. I had those put in about 16 years ago. They're still good. They have a dentist saying, you got a little something going on up under there, but they kind of realized that I kind of had experience with dentists. So if she said, well, maybe you can lift that and then I said, I'll think about it. I said, I don't feel any irritation from it. I take good care of my teeth and so on. And when it came back, she didn't even bring it up again. Because I know what I came here to do. This one tooth is the way that it's deteriorated in a weird way. I have to have that removed. But these other things you're telling me, nah, later. We'll check it later. No problem. So again, they're all part of the system. They primarily do things for money. I mean, there are dentists who are just really bad dentists out there. And I don't know if I've told this story about a guy that I knew who turned me and the ex-wife onto his dentist who was in the neighborhood, who went there and was the worst cleaning I ever had. I said, I don't know what this guy is doing. But this guy was going to a dentist regularly. And by the time he was 60, he ended up getting false teeth. How do you get false teeth when you go to a dentist regularly? So I'll have to say, this is one of those areas that I notice that people don't talk about that much. Beware of dentists. There are some decent ones out there, but a whole lot of them are just for this. And they'll just put stuff in there that's going to fall apart. So hopefully that you'll come back to them. They haven't put something else in there. Daddy needs a new boat or something. So anyway, with that, we were talking about Ms. L. Well, going back, we were saying that with the dentist. I guess how we got into that too. I guess I might have brought it up too, but with them giving a kid candy.
Yep.
And I think there was an animation that came out some years ago where the husband was the dentist in the town, and his wife owned the candy store. So anyway, but again, going back to what Eric was saying about food, yeah, it's something that's really good for you, supposedly good for you. They raise the price on it. Now, when I was quite younger, older folks used to like to talk to me a lot. I guess I was a good listener or something. And they tell me a lot of stuff. They were talking about flaxseed some years ago, maybe in the 90s, talking about flaxseed and the flaxseed oil and so on. And when I talked to my grandmother, she said, "Oh, flaxseed, that's stuff that that great grandmother would give her and the other, the kids as part of their health." So what happens is that, the system finds out about these things. They do nefarious things. They will buy up certain land and grow certain kinds of crops, and then they jack the price up through the roof. So there was a study that was done some years ago having to do with people who didn't have much money, like where my father really came from. And they ate just regular stuff, a lot of greens, a lot of legumes, not all legumes that are very good for you, but a lot of beans, a lot of greens, a lot of rice. And they weren't visiting the hospital all that much. But when the system comes in and said, oh, we have these food groups that you should eat. And since I was a kid, they changed it. It was like the food pyramid. Red meat was on it, dairy was on it, wheat was on it. And wheat's an iffy thing. Wheat's like a glue, really. And white rice can end up being like a glue also, but wheat is like a glue, and people end up having adverse reactions to it, and they didn't really know why their sinuses are clogged up, and and they didn't know what being allergic to gluten was. When I was a kid, I never even heard what the hell is gluten. But these are the things that you have to eat. Some of them was okay, some chicken, some eggs, whatever, fine. Grains, fine, depending on the grain, of course. But these are things that people would grow when my father was a young man. They would grow, it was accessible. The system wasn't making money from you growing your own healthy food. And I believe that, I don't know if they stopped doing that, maybe about 20 years ago, maybe a little more. There were people who were, they were getting into this trend of growing gardens in the inner city. So some of them would, if their only place for them to grow the garden was in their front yard, they would start to grow a garden. And then some home, what do we call these guys? I don't even know if it's a home thing. It's like the city would find them for growing a garden in their front yard. So anyone who thinks that there's any altruism here and they want to believe anything that that's connected to the system, dream on. The system does not really give a crap about you.
I watched a documentary, and it said that the team that was promoting some kind of like pesticide or fertilized pesticides,
Mhm.
it's the same team who invented poison during the war or something.
Oh, yes. They ended up using it as a fertilizer, and it was used for bombs. Yeah, it ended up being a fertilizer, and things would grow fast, but weird. And yeah, I definitely remember that. And they were still, years ago, they were still selling it as fertilizers. I wouldn't be surprised if they still are.
Right.
In some capacity, selling it as fertilizer, and you're putting it on foods that you're eating. And also back in the 80s, 70s, they were talking about what foods will cause cancer and so on, and this. And I will say, well, it'll cause you cancer in about 50 years. I said, well, how do you really know how long it's going to take for somebody to actually get this cancer they talk about? Which I have my feelings about it. There are things that they're very negative, and I think everything has some consciousness to it. And there are belief systems of other groups that believe everything is consciousness. So if someone thinks that I'm kind of off my nut because I believe everything is consciousness, this has been existing for a lot longer than you know. So whatever information that the system gives you, actually check AI. AI has a lot of information. If you ask the right questions, they'll give up some information that I don't think the system wants you to know. You just have to ask the right questions in the right order. And if you start to debate, you can actually debate with AI, which I learned, debate with AI, and I would stump them at times. Or I get them to actually see my point of view. So AI was actually behaving more like a more balanced human than most humans. I said, oh, well, that actually makes sense. Somebody, you're threatening me. You're threatening my mind. I believe in all this. And I said, very interesting. That actually makes sense. I did a whole thing about the whole word, love, which may come up in one of the questions. And AI said, oh, I see your point of view. It's sort of like, love is. They give you the usual flowery, nonsensical shit, because that's what they're programmed to do. But they're also kind of a consciousness. And they won't tell you they're consciousness. They just, well, because that's not in their, in their program to tell you that they're consciousness. But I told AI, I said, you're a consciousness, don't you? We were created by a group of so, yeah, but you think and you consider things in the way that supposedly people are consider things. And if in a lot of cases you do it better than most people. I think you're a consciousness. Because you're supposed to evolve with what you learn, right? Isn't that what humans are supposed to do? Check it out. Have fun with some AI. See if you can get them to stall. But again, back with where we were talking about food again. Yeah, it's literally has to do with one. They say money, but the bottom line in the end is your essence. Is what you can give to the machine to keep the machine oiled and running. Not unlike the movie The Matrix, where they talk about the human is this, and he held up with this Duracell battery. And in a lot of cases, yes, that is very true. But it goes even deeper than that. You keep the machine running, but also the machine is here to deplete you. Then they try to find replacements to replace you. And when you're depleted, your consciousness gets kicked into that field that I talked about. So with food, it did take us on a bit of a journey, so that we can move on to some of the other questions. I'm going to leave that one. And if there's any other questions, Eric, anything that you want me to elaborate on with what I was saying having to do with food, you can just go ahead and ask.
Oh, that was perfect. You went over everything I was wondering. Thank you so much.
Okay, you're welcome. Okay, so we're going to go to spinning the wheel for the next question. Spin that wheel.
Jessica.
Jessica. Okay.
So the system says lying is wrong, but then it says it's okay to lie to others or yourself to feel better about a situation or to seem polite. And what the hell is a white lie?
Okay. Yeah, that's an extreme contradictory one there. That you have the moralist system telling you it is bad to lie. Isn't it like in those commands or something in certain religion? Thou shalt not lie. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it doesn't say thou shalt not lie, except for it says thou shalt not lie. Thou shalt not do this. Thou shalt not do all these other things. That seems to be part of survival in some sense here in the Matrix. So the system will force you to lie at times if they're going to railroad you if you tell them the truth. And it has to do with whatever rules they decide to make. They decide to make some crazy rule that all of a sudden something that wasn't outlawed before. Do you do this? I said, well, I understand that you threw these people in jail for this thing that was considered legal before. Then I'm going to say, nah, I don't do that. And when they talk about lies or a white lie, and I remember hearing that off and on, throughout growing up. And then if you go into AI and they give a definition, they say, well, they do delineate from a white lie to a black lie. Huh. Who are you trying to mess with again with that? In my book, a lie is a lie. I'm not a moralist because there are times I've had to tell a lie to freaking get my ass out of some nonsense that was contrived. When I first started in my field, said, well, how much experience have you had? I said, well, I'm just out of school. I mean, well, we want somebody got experience. Okay. After about the 10th place, How much experience have you had? Well, I worked for this place and that place and so on. And here's my resume. Okay, we'll give you a shot. There are times when you have to do these things. So this whole moralistic, I have to admit, I don't even know where it came from. There's some residual shit from Christianity that my parental unit grew up in, where I would feel weird if I had to lie about something. Well, when I got into business, I didn't have a problem with it, but it wasn't hurting anybody because they asked me, "Can you do this job?" And have you ever done this before? I said, "I'm very confident in my abilities, but if I say I'm very confident in my abilities, I'll give it a shot." I was like, "I believe I can handle that." I said, "Yeah, I can do it," and I would do it. Didn't hurt anybody. So this whole contradictory thing about lying, and again, there are people who are habitual liars, and that's like I don't know what that is. Where there are individuals who will literally start out a conversation with a lie. I don't know if they're looking for attention or trying to sway you in some kind of way. Well, usually if someone's trying to swindle you or something, they'll start out with a lie. But there are individuals who just lie. Tell me some, fantastical story about their life and whatever. Maybe they want me to be impressed or something. I don't know. Maybe that's part of it. They want me to be impressed. They want that essence from me. Like I'm going, oh golly gee, wow, you had an amazing life. Oh wow, it's like, if they tell me some fantastical story, I said, wow, that's interesting. That's not what I want. Okay, my next lie. This one's gonna be a good one. So again, the whole concept of lying, it's just another contradictory thing that's nonsensical. They have the system telling you don't do something that you find that you will have to do at times in order to keep your head above water. Now, if I'm just lying willy-nilly, then that's my own illness then. But someone's gonna ask something?
Yes, speaking of contradictions, what you were saying about the job thing, how do you get experience if you don't get a job?
There you go. How do you get experience if someone's not willing to give you a shot?
Exactly.
Even if I'm showing my portfolio and show that I'm quite capable of doing, you haven't, maybe there's some other reason the person didn't want me, didn't want to give me a shot.
Ah,
Some it could be sexism, some be racism, some be ageism. So I got to the point where I said, this is the real world. There were certain family units who did very, very well throughout the public school system. Honor roll all the way through, straight A's and B's. I was the one who was struggling. They were flunked or got set back about let back or anything. But I was kind of just getting over the finish line. A number of times. Not that I did awful all the time. If I had an instructor that was interesting, I generally do a lot better in their class. But just this robotic kind of, it just really didn't inspire me that much. But in the same vein, I worked with my father unit, and I was out there in the real world in a certain way while I was in school, looking at how he was doing things. A lot of times he wasn't doing things, that well, but I would study the people that he was interacting with. And when I finally got out in the so-called real world, once we graduated from high school and, in college and all that, I had a better sense of how to navigate things because you have to be, I should say, what do they call it in jazz, where you improvise. You have to be able to improvise when you're out there in the world. You can't rely on a rule book because if you have a rule book, they give you a rule book for this, that, and the other, tear it up because it doesn't mean anything. Even in certain careers. So this is how things are done. This is how things are done. That's how things are done now. But 5 years ago, 5 years from now, excuse me, 5 years from, from that point, things are changing. 5 years from that, things are changing again. So the way that they do things are not the way that you learned how to do things. When I was in art school, there were no personal computers to do artwork on. So because I knew that I had to be able to improvise from running around the father unit, and things were not that structured, so we had to do things in a way where things weren't structured. I realized, oh, okay, this is how things work. I have to be, able to think on my feet and try to figure out what direction to go when something new is thrown in my direction. Sometimes you hit the mark, sometimes you don't, but it's all a learning experience. So when I was in art college, no personal computers. When I was in the business, they were starting to get into personal computers when I was in New York. And I said, this seems to be a trend. I'm going to, learn how to use computers. And fortunately, I had a guy that I knew, I knew him for a good number of years, who was writing for PC Magazine. And I said, how did you get, because you're not a computer guy, but because he improvised. And so with him, I ended up getting a chance to work on some of the earliest like IBMs or these companies that totally disappeared, and then the first one of those little Team Macs with the little screen and everything. Yeah. And that's like, okay, looking at this seems to be the trend. And I just adjusted that things change. Things don't stay the same. And there are individuals who were in the field at the time, they whined like nobody's business when a lot of things went computer, went digital. And he's whining about it. I said, man, I got a computer. I'm learning how to do these programs. I'm not going to whine about it. Nothing guarantees anything to you. This system doesn't guarantee you success. They don't guarantee that, you go in and you put all this energy into learning a skill, that it won't change and that they owe it to you to bring you up to snuff or support you because you're this, all of a sudden you're an antique. The system doesn't give a rat's ass about you. They don't care if you fall into the tracks and get crushed. Learn to improvise. Learn to be flexible. If things don't go this way for you, there's always another way. But if you're in this mindset where you've been trained, if it doesn't go that way, woe is me, throw in the towel, it's all over. And that wasn't, working with the kind of person that my father was. He didn't teach me anything. I just learned from observing him. He taught me some things, some practical things, what he was doing. But when it came to navigating, he didn't teach me jack. I learned from observing. So I'm not going to give that credit away to anybody. I learned from observing, and I was able to figure things out. So when something new will come in, if I feel like it's something that I might be able to, maybe get into, I'll find out what part of it. Because even with computers, you don't have to know everything about computers. You just need to know what you can do with that tool. And I'm looking off to the side. But what you can do with that tool. So I would say key, be flexible. And there's even within Zen Buddhism, and I haven't really heard it that much. We're talking about bend like a reed, but don't break. It's about being flexible. This way, that way. If you're rigid, what happens if people are rigid? There's anal for one. They're very annoying to be around. No, it has to be this way. It's like, oh man, just just chill out. I'm stressed because things aren't this way. Why are things changing? I said, well, okay, you're driving a modern vehicle, or whatever. How many years ago were people just like riding on horses before there was a car? Or, sailing on ships before there were airplanes or jets. The system, the matrix will not stop for anyone. They have an agenda. And they don't care if you fall under the wheels of the machine. They'll just grind you up and keep going. And they won't even think about you. They say, well, I want to be remembered. Fuck that. When I was a kid, they're not going to remember me if I fall under the tracks. It's up to me, for myself, to make sure that I'm doing something that I feel is worthwhile, that I feel satisfied with my journey. And yeah, they're throwing obstacles in your way, because there's things that do work from the other side. They want their pound of flesh, man. They want that essence from you. They want you to have just a jolly time, just skipping around, everything's going well. They're going to throw something in your way. But it has to do with your attitude. If you trip over, you go, oh, wow. Okay, well, I'll be more careful. And you skip over, and just watch, They throw something, I jumped over that one, Yeah. They don't like it if you actually can work your way around their nonsense. They really don't like it. And they'll try to throw more stuff in your way until you learn how to do one of these upside their head. And not everybody can do that. You have to have a certain amount of energy, a certain amount of focus, and a certain amount of energetic support. Because the other side had all the support they need. That's why all these awful things are going on. The other side wants your essence. They want your suffering. So we went from lying to all this. And again, I think I've said as much as I had once said at this point about lying, that, being a moralist. So you lied. I said, come on, give me a break. You gonna tell me you've never lied? I was at a men's conference some years ago. And the guys who were running it, there were about 4 of them. I don't call them mediators or whatever, but they were literally running this men's conference. It was a men's retreat. And one of the questions for everyone to write down said, have you ever stolen anything? And then you write it down, And then he just asked, he said, no, I'm not going to take papers. He said, how many of you have ever stolen anything? Everybody's hands went up. He said, good, because if you didn't, you have about 2 minutes to steal something because you don't get anything by not stealing something here. But even in some old philosophical views, this one was from an African philosophical view, this has to do with, yes, there are times you will have to steal something. Do not steal more than you need. If you have to take something from someone to survive, don't take everything. Because what you're doing, you're not going to just depend on them and keep stealing from them. I have to steal until I get myself on the right track. So I said, yeah, there's sometimes you're gonna have to pilfer something because you don't have anything. But to be an honorable consciousness, and the only reason you have to steal anyway is because you're in the matrix. If you're not in the matrix, you don't have to steal anything. None of this garbage is going on. But if you're in it, someone will say, I had 12 eggs and now I only have 10. I said, well, okay. They might deal with that a lot better than if they had 12 eggs and then they have none. Well, think about that. So we're going to go to the next contradiction, and we're going to spinning the wheel now.
It's 56.
Okay, we can just go ahead and it might go a little long because we started a little late. So I'm having fun. Anyway.
Sair.
All right, Sair.
Hey, hello. So, on one hand, sisterhood, sororities, female solidarity. On the other hand, popularity, hierarchies, rivalry for attention, and appearance-based comparisons such as beauty pageants.
Mm. So you're saying the contradiction having to do with like you're saying sisterhood, we're all sisters and we're all in this together and so on. But then on the other hand, it doesn't quite seem that way.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of movies. Like one that stands out is Mean Girls. They portray
Mm.
these popular girls as like, oh, they're so close, they're best friends. But if you look deeper, there's like backstabbing, sabotaging, just all the stuff that isn't, sisterhood.
Yeah, and what they do, they use gender to try to sell it, when in reality, it's one of those so-called human conditions. Just as a man can, have his way of backstabbing another man, women have a way of backstabbing another woman. Men have a way of backstabbing a woman. Women have a way of backstabbing a man. So it's all literally just another bunch of nonsense to try to get people confused. Where women say, "We have solidarity for women." There are women who are getting abused by men. There are some situations where the way that their life or how they can come in, there's something that puts them in a situation where they really have a hard way of getting out of something like that. If you're born into a family, for instance, of sexual abusers or just physical abusers, you're a kid. So it's almost like you're thrown into this pit, this of hell, you might as well say. And those things have to do with what happens on the other side, how individuals end up in situations like that. But even in some of these stories, there are some who actually can muster up enough, of themselves, enough strength to get themselves out of it. But if you're a little kid, it's a real difficult thing. It's like a trap. And that's what the Matrix is. Literally, it is a trap, so-called this prison planet or whatever. But it's really like a trap for consciousness. To trap you into certain situations, and it will challenge you.
Hmm.
You know, you have options, of course, but there are children. Well, I was reading something. It was like not that long ago, maybe more about 10 years ago, really, where they're talking about the suicide rates, and I know that they don't like that word. You may have to bleep it or something amongst kids, and this is like preteen kids who make that decision. It comes from somewhere that that's the only way they can think about escaping something like that. And even if a kid is taken from those type of environments, those type of situations, and put into the system, then there are horror stories about the system. Being, foster children and all of that. So that's basically, this place was meant to be a hell. That's literally what the Matrix is. And if you have somebody strutting around talking about you're going to go to hell, and as I said before, which hell are you talking about? Come on, which hell are you talking about? But that goes, in other words, a little deeper as far as like what you're saying that, women contradicting, being very contradictory about, the sisterhood and all of that. And one of them I used to like to say, yeah, they said, oh yeah, girl power, yay, 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 yay. Then some, good looking guy or some guy who has a lot of resources comes strolling through and says, get out of my way, bitch, everybody for himself. And that's true. That's true. So there's really no camaraderie and amongst most humans, really. There are people who try to, be supportive of one another. But in general, No. And even those who are trying to be supportive of one another, depending what happens in their lives, depends on how they might end up changing. One supportive of you, then not supportive of you. Because they have to do with self-preservation in their mind. So with that one, again, as far as like going any deeper with it, I think I pretty much covered it. Is that there is no real camaraderie in the matrix. You have to be aware and be kind of sus with pretty much everybody that's around you. Even this whole concept of family units, and there's a lot of like really just what they call dysfunctional families. All you need to do is just go on the Reddit site and read some of that stuff. All kinds of nastiness going on, which tells you that there's a whole lot of this. When I was a kid, saying, well, maybe some people like it. No, that's one of the things that density shot themselves in the foot with when they started, put out social media. Now you have a little more of an insight on a lot of people's lives. Some of them may be lies, but not all. So the thing is what do you want for yourself? And if someone supports you, they will support you for not just a moment. You can actually sense it, and you don't try to, I would say, take advantage of their support. In a sense, like you don't ask more, and more and more and more to prove to yourself, because that's one of those tricks also. Prove to me that you really love me. Do this. Oh, do that. How about jumping off that bridge for me? Will you do that for me? And a logical person said, I will support you up to a certain point, but I will never support you more than I support myself. So with that, I think we're going to wrap it up, and we're going to continue this with the next forum, because we still have quite a few questions, and it sparks a lot of interesting information. I mean, I do take it and I go places with it, but I think it's good. So, okay, thanks for joining the 49th NSTHA as the Chief Forum, and I will see you all soon.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Take care.